Hey everybody, Ron Lake here, School Social Work class. Today we are going to be working on understanding special education assessment and specifically behavior rating scales. So we use behavior rating scales for educational assessments versus medical assessments. Medical providers might use the same behavior rating scale, but for us in the school setting, we're doing educational evaluations or assessments with educational professionals. And it's for the purpose of determining special education evaluation if there's an educational disability. And then that informs our individual education plan. We do these typically every 3 years, and we can do them more often as needed. And this is different than a medical assessment or a diagnostic assessment, which is done by medical professionals to determine if there's a disorder, which then forms a treatment plan. Often these are updated much more frequently, every 6 to 12 months or so, or as needed. So educational and medical evaluations and assessments are different, is the key point here. On the educational side, we have initial evaluations, which are done, when we suspect that there might be a disability. And then every 3 years after that, or as needed, we have the reevaluations. So the initial evaluations are much more involved often, and the students need to meet whatever the initial criteria is for that category of disability before they qualify for service. With the reevaluations, it's different. They don't need to meet initial criteria anymore. All they need to do, or all we need to do, is show that student has a continued need for service. So it's a different standard between initial and reevaluations. Before we ever get started on an evaluation, we need to give the parent prior written notice, or PWN, that includes the evaluation plan. Typically that's developed by a team of school staff, and where we propose what assessments we're going to do during the evaluation. So there's an image here on the right. I know it's punchy, you can't see it, but each section kind of goes down the left side, and it explains the tools that we're going to use and who's going to be doing it. The parent reviews this assessment plan and then gives written permission to get started. Once we have written permission, then we have 30 school days to complete it. So this is the image at the bottom here is a portion of the assessment plan, and it's the stuff that I wrote in for a specific student. There's no identifying information in here, and you can see we as a team, we decide what we're going to do, and it might be different depending on the student and if they've already qualified or not, and how they qualified. In this case, the student we're looking at had already qualified through an emotional behavioral disorder, but we're still using a behavior rating scale because it had been 5-6 years, and we're curious and believe that there's some different needs that might be going on. We're also doing a functional behavior assessment and a mental health screening, and these are required tools for some categories, including EBD. Finally, it lists the school social work here, but it does vary across districts who's doing what portions of the evaluation. And often we can do these collaboratively with other team members too. So under emotional behavior disorder criteria, it comes from the Minnesota Department of Education. There's a link to the EBD criteria. There's an image on the right that's linked. The BASC is part of what we use in Duluth, or the Behavior Assessment System for Children 3. And it's that it helps us identify and determine if there's clinically significant scores. It is a standardized and nationally normed behavior rating scale. We also typically combine our record review and interviews and observations within the functional behavior assessment, which we'll cover later on in the course. So as I mentioned a second ago, the BASC is the one that we use in Duluth. It's standardized and normed. We use it for preschoolers through high school, teachers, parents, and then there's a self-rating tool that students use. We can do that as young as elementary. So then when we get the results of these, we enter in the rating scales into the software for the BASC, and it gives us a report. On the report, it identifies critical items, clinical and adaptive scales. There's some additional scales, some information for interventions, and a tool to use with our systematic observations as well. And the scores range from average to at risk to clinically significant. When we write up the BASC or share the information with parents, in Duluth we use um, SpEd forms, which is the software. And it's typically the school psychologist or the school social worker. Again, it varies by district. And we enter this information in or under the heading for a social, emotional, behavioral portion of the evaluation report. On the image on the right, these are all the different headings for what's in an evaluation report. And you can see that the social emotional behavioral portion is part of that. So you click on the link in the software and it brings you to an open page, and then you can start entering any information. This is where we also include the FBA observations and mental health screening. I guess a pro tip would be to write it in Google or Word and then copy it over. It's a little harder to navigate SpEd forms, so it's nice to have a copy for ourselves. So when we're writing up the BASC, we want to share the results of the BASC 3 in the evaluation report. Typically, I separate the portions of the report that I'm writing up into paragraphs, so it's easier for the readers to consume. And it's also easier for me to write it. There's an introduction section or paragraph. There's typically a paragraph on who completed it and if it came back valid or not. There's information on critical items, which of course are important to consider and share with the team. And then there's clinical and adaptive scales that get written up, and maybe a summary of past BASC results if the student has done it 3 years or 6 years previously. Some districts require that you put a chart of the scores in the report, which is an easy, good way to do it. Typically, you'd want the chart to be by scale and then the raters, so you can see right away if you're seeing clinically significant scores across all settings or not. The example that's provided here is linked. You can either click on the image or click on the link to the left and read what's written.